Good morning to those of you in the Great Hall and those of you who may be joining us online, making space for some of the rolling admissions, kind of like college around here, right? We just roll on in as we get started. We'll honor the fact that it's just past 9:15, and I have, I think, more slides than we can cover. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to begin, as seems appropriate for Lent, with a confession, which is that last night I was reading this beautiful piece by Bonnie Whitehouse, who's written this wonderful book called Seasons of Wonder, and it was all about wilderness. And I marked the page, and I was like, I'm going to take this with me, and this is going to be our opening reflection in the morning. This is so great, and it's on my bedside table. So maybe it'll make a cameo appearance later on in the series, because this is the beginning of a conversation about wilderness that is going to include some lovely, lovely folks. So next Sunday, Tina Sullivan, who is the executive director of the Overton Park Conservancy, will be our guest. I'm really excited about having her here with us. She and I have done some work on mindful walking in the Old Forest, and she herself has some distant church connections, but a real strong sense of spirituality and the sacred, certainly in these wild places, even when they're right in the middle of the city. So we're excited to welcome her next Sunday. And then our own Jim Boyd will be with us the Sunday after that on March 12th, priest and friend of Calvary. That's what that little, and that acronym is, the FOC. And we'll be looking forward to hearing his reflections. He and I have already had some really, really great conversations, and I'm excited to hear about canoes and things. So we'll see. And then on March 19th, one of our favorite Lenten Preaching Series guests, Padre Gotuma, will be here. He'll preach for LPS on Friday. He'll lead a retreat at St. Columba on Saturday, which I think there's still spaces for that you can sign up to be with us out there. And then he'll be with us again on Sunday in the pulpit. He's preaching, and he and Scott are going to have a conversation about wilderness and poetry. So it's going to be a great series of conversations about these themes, and I'm looking forward to hearing what all these good folks have to say. I want to start us off with both today and first thing this morning with kind of a grounding for just a moment. And if you would indulge me, you don't have to close your eyes unless it's helpful for you, but to imagine a wild place. Whatever that might mean. A wild place. So when you have it in your mind's eye, just to kind of name to yourself or to notice for yourself a few of the details about what makes something wild, what makes something a wilderness. And as there are a few of us in here right now, if anybody wants to offer up a word or an image that's part of your imagined wilderness wildscape in your head, anybody have a detail or a note to share?
I hadn't thought about it before, but just hearing you say wild space and then say the word wilderness, I think of them as two different things.
Oh, interesting, right? Yeah, okay. One goes one way, one goes another. One feels yeah, okay. Trees, me too, Martha, me too. Every time, trees, yep. Anybody else?
A negative thought, no
No
roads.
roads. Okay, so an absence, right? Something is missing from the landscape that you're looking at, Dana Sue, right? So no roads. Those are great. So when we talk about wilderness, what we're talking about are, in some ways, wild places. This word in Scripture, in Hebrew Scripture, is midbar, and that word gets translated a couple of different ways. We'll talk about that as we go. Forests, that's where my head goes. I grew up in this part of the world, and it looks like lush green, a mix of evergreen and deciduous trees to me. That's what a forest looks like. That's what the wilderness looks like to me. But there are other ways that it can look. It can look like a desert. It could look like a tundra. It could look like any kind of untrampled, unroaded, inaccessible place. There's a writer named Richard Bauckham, and he says this. He says, when we call something wilderness, we are sometimes layering on, it's a judgment, and judgment sounds negative. It can be good or bad, right? Like we're just naming it. We're naming this as a wilderness. And it's something that's a non-human sphere. There are no roads. It's not for us. But this highlights the fact that it is the sphere of other creatures whom God has made for it. The implication is precisely that not all habitats are for humans. Some are for other creatures, right? So our kind of maybe a little egocentric view is that if it's not for me, then it's a wasteland, or it's other, or it's foreign, or it's hard, or there's something about it that I would layer a judgment on. But it is actually for other creatures whom God made, the space and the creatures that roam in it. And so I'll offer you to that point a little bit of Psalm 104, which is a very long psalm, and these are a few verses. You set the earth on its foundations so that it shall never be shaken. You cover it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke, they flee. At the sound of your thunder, they take flight. They rose up to the mountains, ran down to the valleys, to the place that you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. Springs, birds, asses, cedars, storks, lions, sun, darkness, and crags all appear in this psalm, right? Like I said, you're getting the edited version. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Yonder is the sea, great and wide. Creeping things, innumerable are there, things both small and great. There go the ships and Leviathan that you formed to sport in it. So this idea that the world is vast and full, and some of it is accessible to us, and some of it is for us. Some of it we are called to till and to keep, as also instructed in the Bible. But some of it is not for us. But that doesn't mean it's not valuable. It's not created. It's not sacred. It's not intentional. It's not of God. All of those things, that this world is created for God's sake, and is rich and diverse, and we don't always have to be the center of the story. So that some of our experience in the wilderness is this idea of, oh, I am actually not the center of the story, right? And that can be very disconcerting and very unnerving. So the earth is for more than humans, right? The psalm speaks of the seas that rose over the mountains and then recede and then are bounded. This is a little bit of an article from Scientific American, and I don't know if you can read that. I don't know if I can read that, or this, frankly. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet, an area of nearly 140 million square miles. I can't comprehend that. That doesn't even make sense to me. It is so immense that explorers once thought there was no way to cross it. Once our ships were advanced enough to do so, naturalists then thought it would be impossible for humans to ever exhaust the fisheries or to drive marine species to extinction. How we have proved them wrong. So this sense of the immensity of the world, and one of the things that we'll keep coming back to is that in the biblical perspective, there were things that were inconquerable to them that we have conquered. That comes with pros and cons. That is a good thing and a bad thing. That is a hard place to live, and it is one that makes the world easier to live in many ways. So to imagine for a moment, to add to our kind of mental imagery of wilderness, the sea, to think of that as a wild place, underneath the surface especially. There's somebody once said that we know more about the surface of the moon than we do the bottom of the sea. We're more familiar with this other, outside of Earth. It's not a planet. My son would tell me that the moon is not a planet. But whatever it is, this orbiting rock, we know more about it than we do pieces of our own planet because it's so hard to get to the bottom of the sea. So the sea is a place of wildness, and it may be a place of wilderness. Another image that may be a little bit strange in terms of thinking about wilderness, because there's no trees, is a tundra, right? Is a faraway place at the poles. One of my favorite writers, Annie Dillard, writes a good bit about all kinds of elements of the natural world, and she has an essay called An Expedition to the Pole, which unpacks these 18th and 19th century explorers who were trying to find the pole and sometimes the lack of wisdom and judgment that they showed in planning their trips, and more concerned about taking their silver and their chess sets than they were like coats and food. And they're maybe a little bit of arrogance, maybe a little bit of just not even knowing. How do we even know? She has a wonderful essay that's called An Expedition to the Pole that I commend to you. And in it she says this: the absolute is the pole of relative inaccessibility, located in metaphysics. It is that point of spirit furthest from every accessible point of spirit in all directions. Like the others, it is a pole of the most trouble. It is also, I take this as a given, she says, the pole of great price, which is a great play on words with the pearl of great price, that we might from time to time try to get to these places that are just as far away from anything for the purpose of getting to the place that is as far away from anything as we can get. Like, that is the journey. Okay, so with all of that, all of that is just to expand first our understanding and our mental maps and our mental understanding of wilderness, that it's wild places, it's untamed places, it's places that we thought once were inaccessible. Maybe now we've built a road or a bridge, or we've got a ship that will take us there. I could add pictures of outer space, right? We're figuring out how to travel there as well. Which brings us back to this word of wilderness in the biblical stories. Midbar sometimes meant just the place at the edge of town. We can hear our bell folks. Thanks. That was a place that you would take your sheep and your grazing animals. It was not town, but you could get there. So sometimes when they're talking about going to the wilderness, they're talking about this immediate place that's adjacent to civilization, but it's a place that you can get to. And sometimes they're talking about a place that is further, that is inhospitable, that is inaccessible. And the same word is used for both. So we have to read with context when we're reading these stories of, is this a place that I can get to, like I can get in my car and drive for an hour and be out in the woods, right? Or is this a place that I need to take a ship to the bottom of the planet or to another planet? Is this, and I might use the same word for that. Oftentimes, though, one of the things that when we know we're in a wilderness place is that we know that we've lost our bearings. We don't have roads. We have to rely on a compass or the sun to tell us, and even, maybe that's not even, maybe it's, cloud banks, and we can't even figure that out. We've lost our ability to navigate the ways that we usually navigate. That might be in a desert, that might be a tundra, a forest, a sea, or an outer space. It might be because of how we are internally in a wilderness when we've lost our bearings and our inability to navigate, because of external circumstances that we've just I don't even know what's happening out here in the world anymore. I've heard more than one person say that in the last couple of weeks. I don't even know where I live anymore. This can be because, again, this kind of internal, this place and the external place may be because of climate. And again, that could be metaphor climate or actual climate, relationships, our civic life. And the wilderness places, whether they're adjacent to town or further away, were places that people went sometimes by choice, sometimes not by choice. Sometimes exiled there, not by choice. Sometimes chosen, like I'd like to go on retreat. I'm going to leave here and I'm going to go to this quiet place, this place alone and away. So all of that is held. All of those kind of different and even contradictory ideas about wilderness are held in this world, in this word. So this may be closest to the idea of what we imagine when we imagine a biblical wilderness. I've never been to the Holy Land, so I'm going to rely on others. But this idea of I know that there are lush valleys there. I know that there are rivers. I know there's green space. But there's also this kind of idea that a lot of it might be kind of brown. Maybe that's the stories that and the pictures that I was shown when I was 4 that imprinted. But it looks kind of mostly like this in my imagination. So this figure, this person is heading out into that space. We might make some assumptions. This looks a little bit by choice, but we don't know what drives a person out into the wilderness. The story in the gospel today is that Jesus was driven out into the wilderness to have this 40-day fasting experience. What moved him, what nudged him, what drew him, what prodded him out, whether that felt like a choice or whether that felt like it's just something I must do, or whether that came from others. And he's not the only one. So whether they go by choice or by force, again and again, this happens in Scripture. From Noah, if we count especially seas and water as a wilderness, he certainly spent his 40-ish in the wilderness. Hagar is driven away from her family and her known homestead out into the wilderness. Jacob, Moses, certainly famously, Elijah spends his 40 in the wilderness when he's trying to kind of figure out what does it mean to be the prophet? Who am I? Where is God? And then, as I've already said, Jesus as well. Whenever any of these folk head out there, again, whether by choice or by force, they enter into spaces where they are vulnerable physically, where they are dislocated, they are disoriented. And then there's this sense of this kind of in-betweenness. One of the kind of churchier words is this idea of liminal space, like if you could stand actually on the threshold with a foot in 2 worlds. And I think this idea of midbar as kind of the in-between place between civilization and the deeper wildness may speak to that. But it's also a place where things change, where transitions happen, where people become something new. Sometimes that's recognized by those around them. Sometimes it's only an internal change. It's a place where we lose our bearings, as I said, but we often gain an identity, whether that's a new identity or a shifted identity or our own sense of ourselves that happens again and again and again, where people's relationships with each other change, their relationships with God change, sometimes their names change in these in-between times and spaces. So let's talk for just a minute about a particular group of people who spend famously 40 years in the wilderness, and that is our friends the Israelites as they leave Egypt and head to the Promised Land. And they're there in the middle, in the wilderness. I think you could argue by choice and by force. There's some agency in there, and they're getting out. There's also Pharaoh who's coming after them, and there's Moses who's leading them. But in this in-between space, once they get over the Red Sea, Pharaoh can't reach them anymore, right? With his demands for labor and his requirements and their slave status. And one of the first things they do is dance. Very quickly, though, that dancing turns to, oh no, now that we're away from Pharaoh, where are we? What is this? And they lose their certainties, things that are predictable, even if those were bad, right? Sometimes we would choose, they say often, like, send us back to Pharaoh, where at least we knew we were going to get dinner at the end of the day, even if the day was forced labor, enslaved building of, pyramids and things. They say things like, if only we had died in Egypt, naming their anxiety, and then having this nostalgia to get back to that place where at least they knew what was going on. In this in-between space, they have to imagine things in whole new ways. Imagine themselves, their relationship with each other, their relationship with God. That's hard to do. It's really hard to change our minds. It's really hard to change our minds about who we are. Perhaps one of the reasons they spend so long out in that wilderness is that it takes them a while to kind of work through all of this. While they're there are initially no visible signs of life support. We know that quail and manna and water from a rock will appear for them, but all of that requires trust, imagination, faithfulness, and accepting that this is dinner, right? The word for manna means actually, what is this? Like, they looked at it and they're like, I'm not used to eating this for supper, right? I don't know what this is. This reflection comes largely from Walter Brueggemann's excellent piece on the wilderness zone. So they're experiencing vulnerability, dislocation, disorienting. They're in this in-between transition space, trying to become a new people. They lose their bearings, and they're starting to gain a new identity as a new people. That takes 40 years. Now, we know that 40 is just kind of a stand-in often for like a really long time. So when something takes 40 days or 40 years, it's often this idea of like, we can't tell you how long it was, but it was long enough. Certainly longer than most people wanted it to be usually. But what that means is that's enough time for there to be a full generational cycle. So the people who left Egypt are literally not the people who walk into the promised land. The whole new group of people. It's the children and the children's children, right? Because so much needed to change for them. Not even Moses gets to walk into the promised land. They have to be formed and reformed, changed and prepared. Because the people who lived in Egypt aren't the people who can live in the promised land. So much change is required of them. And they have to spend so much time in this liminal in-between place where who knows what might be possible, and where they have to learn trust, imagination, creativity, identity. And very similarly, this is the story we'll hear in church today, the story of Jesus, 40 days, not 40 years, in the wilderness, fasting, and then this head-to-head with Satan, who comes to him with his threefold temptations. But again, much like the Israelites, it starts with one story. Both of those stories actually start with going through some water, which is not lost on the kind of baptismal liturgists in the room. From this, Jesus has grown up. He is beginning his ministry. He is baptized by John. He hears his belovedness from God, and he is led out into the desert. And when he comes out of that on the other side, he's still the same person. He didn't have a generational change like the Israelites do, but he lives in the world in a new way. He is known in a new way. He begins his public ministry in this moment. And as much as he's God incarnate, he is also human. So while he was there, he got hungry, he felt vulnerable, he was disoriented, and he goes through this kind of this moment of becoming and changing. So I'm going to pause there, having laid out these different biblical images, and see if there are any questions or observations or things that you're noticing or wondering about. As we think about the role of the place of wilderness and how people move through it. One of the things that strikes me is that I don't think, quick mental scan, we don't have stories where people get stuck in the wilderness. As much as they're there, it seems like forever. I'm sure the Israelites felt pretty stuck. But nobody stays there forever. However long it takes, yeah.
Overfunctions, surprise, a priest with control issues. The lack of control over the environment you're talking about.
Right. Mm-hmm.
First I've thought about manna, it's always been, oh, how cool, you wander out here and God drops sustenance in here, because aren't humans great
Yeah.
Like, creation just waits for creation to produce food, and then it goes, like, I don't think I've ever thought of it as that way, as actually the wilderness is they didn't cultivate it. They weren't in control of the earth, but the earth produced food.
Right.
And the rest of creation eats that way, whether it's a
Yeah, I think that's really
squirrel for a
interesting. Yeah.
lion or a berry for a bear or
Right, and not having thought about that like that, that's helpful for me too, just thinking about that earlier idea of some of the wilderness is not for us, but it is for creatures. It is providing for whoever lives there, and they had to learn how to be like that.
And we still, like, in these little practices, we're like, I'm going to get my tent, and I'm going to still going to carry my freeze-dried food. But
Yes, right. Yeah, I'm going to take a lot of supplies with me when I go to the wilderness. Yeah, I'm not going to go unprepared. Yeah. Yeah, Kate.
I just suddenly thought of the times that I had been on retreats or presidials or marriage encounters or whatever, where you were taken off someplace and didn't know, you were just kind of out of control.
Right. Right.
You didn't know what was awaiting you, that you felt very changed at the end.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's intentionality in those experiences, right? Like the people who were creating that space, they might take your watch, right? Now we take phones. Like to create a space where we can be a little bit like, whoa, is it lunchtime? I don't even know, takes some effort. And that's very much sometimes in the psychology of planning these experiences for those of us who live very much with like control and structure and all of that. Yeah. Ted.
I was going to approach it from the other side of having been on retreats and stuff, especially with teenagers. What do we do next? What do we do next?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm happy to throw some teenagers under the bus, but that's me too. Like what's going to happen next? What time is this? When is that going to be? I like to know a schedule as much as anybody, and to not know. The other thing about 40, whether it's years or days or whatever, is that nobody who started knew 40 years. They just knew they had to keep walking, right? We don't know necessarily when we go in. I mean, the nice thing about a weekend is that it's not going to be any longer than 72 hours, maybe 48 if it didn't, but to walk into true wilderness would mean to say, I don't know how long this is going to last. I don't know how long I'm going to feel like this. I don't know how long it's going to take before something, shifts or changes for me and I can take the next step forward. Yeah, Madge.
Looking at the last two lines on your slide, having spent the weekend with Becca Stevens and all
Yeah.
the work we do with this little group, that's a description of what our women go through.
Right.
As they come into a residential program for 2 years where for the first time they have a bed that's their own, a closet that's their own, a space that's their own, but at the same time they're vulnerable, they're disoriented, they're transitioning, they're becoming.
And my guess is that, like the Israelites, there are times where they say, at least out there I knew.
Yep.
Right?
Oh, and that happens.
Right? Like this foreign sense of whatever it is just too foreign, even if the bed is more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this last line, places where we lose our bearings and gain our identity, finding out who they really are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Dana Sue?
I think you don't even have to go anywhere. You can stay in your own house and be in the wilderness.
100%.
If something, a major change in your life happens, you have to go through all that to see where you're going.
Yes, absolutely. And it's almost like you knew the next slide. So well done, segue, transition. Good job. So there is this sense of we can talk about the woods and we can talk about the tundra and the seas and the desert and all of that, but we go through these, we immediately went to our own examples of these women or our own homes or our own experiences where we walk into a new place that is foreign and uncomfortable and we don't know how long we're going to be there and it's going to change us and we may not like that very much, right? And I just started a list. And one of the things that I want to point out is that like the Israelites not knowing how long it was going to take them to get to the promised land, we don't often know what is on the other side, right? So we go through COVID. We don't know how long that lockdown was going to last. We don't know how long we're going to have to wear masks. We don't know how long this is going to be. We don't know. We're still feeling the effects and the change of that, the changed patterns, the changed priorities and all that. And, you know, you've heard everybody who started to say post-COVID, and then they kind of stopped themselves because we don't even know what that is, right? Have we gotten there yet? Are we there? We're having conversations in our community about, well, this is a way of policing. It works like this. Is that what we want? And I don't even know what could we put in that place, right? We could do this with all kinds of civic conversations, this political stagnation, right? But it seems like we're stuck there, and it's hard to imagine. This is not great, but I don't know what it might look like. How to imagine something better? So I feel like the Israelites, like, well, at least we know what a two-party system, you know, or at least we know that. Well, this is what happens if you get pulled over, you know, or this is what happens, you know, that the reluctance to kind of say, I'm going to keep walking even though I don't know what this will look like further down the road. As we let go of some of our colonial mindsets and our institutions for our churches, as we think about, I mean, we're in a church, so that's the name, but every significant institution has this kind of embedded colonial mindset of like, what would it mean to change that? How would we let go of power that we've held if I look like me? How would it be if I upended this? How would it be if I tried to repair those relationships or make amends for that? And then, as you guys said, this is all at the macro level, but in our own lives. I don't know how it will be when this person isn't with me anymore. I don't know how it will be when I have to move, when my job changes, when this goes forward, when this doesn't go forward, right? And always there's that sense of, if it were predictable, then we could say, I mean, I said this in the sacristy this morning, I was getting a little mini therapy session with Scott and Paul, like, if I just knew what was coming, it would be so much easier. Then I could do it. Somebody would just tell me, do this. I would do it surely, but it's the like, I don't even know. I don't have my bearings. And that makes us vulnerable. We feel dislocated. We feel disoriented. And we're becoming, always becoming, but we don't know what we're becoming. So back to Brueggemann, I want you to hold this personal, political, cultural space of the wilderness as metaphor for our actual own lives. And hear what he says here. Wilderness is an arena without visible life supports. Although they manifest, they do come. Wherein wilderness-like protest and complaint, those Israelites, what are we doing out here? Please just send us back to Pharaoh, because that was at least reliable and better, was the order of the day. There's an impetus by the protesters to push toward new social possibility that is no more clear and alternative to us than was the land of promise, to the erstwhile slaves in the wilderness. Ponder that while So this process applies throughout our many micro lives, this season of Lent, this next 6 weeks, or this couple of years, while we're waiting through something, waiting with a D, and it applies at a cultural, civic, political level, and our communal lives. And there's protest, and there's complaint, and there's confusion, and there's fear, and there's wishing it was like it used to be. And then there's these, what if, maybe we get a glimpse. Maybe in the middle of the wilderness, it's beautiful, right? Maybe we can breathe a little more deeply for a while. And then there's manna. And then there's angels who come and wait on us. And then, but we didn't know that was coming. We had to trust and wait and spend our time in this liminal in-between place with no roads and no signs. And that's hard. So a few other folks to weigh in on this conversation. I've given you a longer piece by Rachel Held Evans. If you're interested, you can read the longer piece. These are some snippets from that. In talking about wilderness, this is what she has to say. She says, "But be warned, in Scripture and in life, the road to deliverance nearly always takes a detour. Rarely do the people of God reach any kind of promised land without a journey or two through the wilderness." And later, she's actually quoting this Jonathan Martin piece. I'll let you know a little bit more about that. This is the longer piece of this. All the good stuff happens in obscurity. This is what else it says. This is, if you want to look, it's on page 49 of your handout on the flip back. "In our culture of constant access and nonstop media, nothing feels more like a curse from God than time in the wilderness," wrote Jonathan Martin in his book Prototype. "Our society tells us that if and when we get there, post-COVID, with a new job, with a new thing, with the settled, with the clarity, whatever, the job or the position or the degree we've always wanted, that's when all the important stuff will start happening. Not so. All the good stuff happens in obscurity, happens while we're lost, happens off the grid, happens when there wasn't anybody around to say, look at what's happening, right? So we come back to this idea that God created this magnificent, beautiful, physical world in which we live. Some of it's for us. Some of it we've made it for us. We've ground our way in there. We've made it accessible. But it was all created for the wonder and the breadth of it all. And even the places and the parts of it that we get lost in were part of that original creation, that original vision, that original mindset and idea of God, that it all belonged. Oh Lord, how manifold, completely just mind-bogglingly immense and diverse, manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. So it's one of those conundrums, right? If all the good stuff happens in obscurity, our willingness to go there, to put ourselves there, to stay there long enough, to see, to imagine, to wonder. This is one of the callings, right? So when we think either at a kind of physical world, back to our trees and our camping and those initial visions, or these kind of more like, well, it's also a metaphor for this experience, or this in my civic life, or this in my personal life. What does it feel like to imagine that we might go there and stay there for a while, and what we might learn there? This is a question you can answer aloud, or you can answer in your own quiet. But the wild places are all, the wildernesses, which are interchangeable but different connotations, and I appreciate that from the early in the class, are part of it, part of creation, part of this world. So I wonder what reflections or thoughts, observations you might have. Kate?
I'm thinking about whenever you have those experiences, you want to believe that you have somehow been transformed, that you have come out the other end.
Right, yes.
But that it's not just about you, it's about your stewardship of the land, of your interactions with other people, how you can make everything better.
Yeah.
It's not just about you.
Right, that change for my sake isn't of much use, right? Like if I'm a different person, but you can't tell, or it doesn't impact my relationship with you or the way that I am in the world, then what was the point of all that, right? It should be lived out and be seen and be recognizable by other people. And I think that's sometimes why so often for our biblical moms and dads, names change, right? Or places change. There's some external marker. Either they go live in a new place, or they change their name when they come back to their original place, or there's something that kind of brands that and says, I'm this way now. This is how it is now. Yeah. And that if it doesn't then impact my relationships with others, my relationship with the earth, then what was the point? My relationship with God. Yeah. Yeah, me too.
I'm wondering how much from, whether it's a macro level with policing or politics or on a micro level, like Madge was talking about, how much we should be the ones forcing people into a wilderness
Oh, interesting.
versus letting it happen naturally.
That's such a great question.
Situations where you see there needs to be a wilderness type transition.
Yeah.
Do you sit back and let it happen naturally, or do you find women who need help and force them into place and or just other situations? Will policing ever change if we do not force
Right. Yeah. That's such a brilliant question.
forcing versus natural?
Yeah, what comes internally, what are the circumstances that I can't not go? I mean, like, right? Yeah, other thoughts on that, about that role of being kind of motivated from within to change or to go, or no, we're just gonna, I mean, and I think the Israelites are a great example. If it was both, they wanted out, and here comes Pharaoh chasing them, and Moses leading them. I don't know. Other thoughts about this? This is a great question. How do we get moving?
I think it's got me thinking, for some reason a minute ago I was thinking about adolescence as a wilderness, that we usually tell people you need to get past it. But this was having me think about what's the genius of that particular time in and of its essence of integrity, and it makes me think about your question of whatever the wilderness, like how do we ask the question, not how can I take control when it's no longer wilderness, I guess. Or what's the opportunity that this provides? That is there something in the situation that's a little more open to what this phase or what this moment might provide?
And I think we can find ourselves too. So a couple things. This is so lovely. And I also just walked in the room. So when I think about adolescence, I think about high school and middle school, and people who teach in high school and middle school do it because they love it, right? Or they're really bad teachers. Because there's honor and dignity to going through adolescence. Like it's its own little moment. But now I've lost my other thought that I was going to say about, like, if I can also be in the wilderness and pretend like I'm not. Like I can just say no, I'm still gonna have like this. Oh, y'all haven't read the Expedition of the Pole, but like the people who take their silver and their chess sets with them on these god-awful journeys, right? Of like, I'm gonna make this like home, even though I'm in this like completely foreign landscape. And I think there are people, back to the kind of social, cultural, civic converts, who say, I'm not gonna see that this is different. I'm just gonna hold on to, it has to be like I'm familiar with. And I don't know how the opening up happens. That mostly God work, I think, but maybe a little nudging, maybe a little of that. I don't know. Dana Sue.
Sometimes when you're in a wilderness, you'll receive insights that kind of help you start working yourself to be transformed.
Yes, right? That you could,
You'll be somewhere, maybe in a beautiful scene or something, and it dawns on you.
right? That's how these aha.
Here, and he will help you if you just open up and accept it.
Yeah, that those insights, those aha moments happen, and they can happen anytime. This is not to put constraints on spirit, but like they tend to happen more when we've stripped away some of the busyness or the distractedness or the comforts of our lives. I tend to hear more of that when I'm in those places, even though I know I want that, but I still don't want to go. It is very uncomfortable. Yeah. Yeah.
like the isolation of actually being out in the wilderness by yourself and how hard that would be, or just like even trying to isolate yourself in general. Like I teach high school. So
Oh, yay.
trying to get a kid to sit there and not just be bored for a second and not look at their
Yeah.
phone.
Yeah.
It's a struggle.
It's a struggle. I'm 48. It's a struggle. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is both it is because it's in us to connect, to want, and that kind of thing, and so to be quiet, to be still. I, for the first time, thinking about our Tuesdays silent in the city, which we'll be doing here during Lent, to imagine that's a wilderness place, that for 30 minutes to be untethered, even if I'm in the most familiar space I have come to know and love. But and it's also interesting thinking about your point about isolation, is that some of these stories happen where people were by themselves, and some of them happened in community. The whole community went out into the wilderness. And then yes, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else are you wondering about or thinking about? Yeah.
I think as we get older, I know personally, experiences that I have if I'm out walking
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, and just by myself and it's quiet, mean a lot. However, as a teenager, I can remember, I imagine this is probably true with most teenagers. You don't think too much about wilderness experiences.
Mm-hmm.
It's activity, all the things we're involved in, and so on. And I was one time, I grew up in the Presbyterian Church in Nashville, and we had a retreat down at Nakomi, which is in Centerville.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful, beautiful
Mm-hmm.
camp. And it was a weekend retreat. And one of the things that we did on Saturday, amongst all of the craziness that went on while we were down there, was to have some quiet time. To do whatever you wanted to for a period of an hour or so. And if you've ever been to Nakomi, you know it's very hilly in that area. Well, there was a very, very steep hill and, of course, thick woods right there at the camp. And I went off by myself and just hiked up onto this top of this hill that was just, the farther and farther away I got, the less and less I couldn't hear anything or couldn't see anything down at the camp. And right up on the top of this hill, it was a beautiful, beautiful day in the springtime and very clear, and I found myself just in complete silence. I mean, complete silence.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, and it strikes me to this day as a teenager, that one experience, how powerful that was.
Right?
And I felt like I really don't even want to leave this place.
Mm.
I'd like to stay here all day long.
Let's build 3 shelters and stay.
Yeah. Every now and then I hear a bird chirp or hear the rustle of leaves with
Yeah.
the wind or whatever. And then I thought, well, I've got to leave. I've got to go back down. As I went back down the hill, I could gradually hear the noise of people laughing and carrying on and so on. But that was just a really, really powerful experience.
Right. And so interesting, too, that, right, where you might say, it would be very easy to say, well, but nothing happened. But you have not forgotten that space and that moment and that, right, that was, yeah.
All the good stuff happens in obscurity.
All the good stuff happens in obscurity. Martha, were you going to? Okay. Okay. All right.
Well, I was thinking about with adolescents, the rites of passage that they learn about in native cultures.
Yeah.
We have confirmation, but
Mm-hmm.
we don't really
Yeah, kind of hit or miss, yeah.
the forced experience in the wilderness.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking, too, about those rights, what I think of when you raise that, which is so beautiful to think about, is how those, we're talking about wilderness as a place with no roads, but there are from time to time markers, right, of like, somebody builds the cairn or somebody marks the tree, and that's what a rite of passage, like, if somebody else has been here before, there's some anchoring, even in the middle of the wilderness, like in the middle of adolescence, that we would look for something, like a moment, a ritual, an event, and outside of that time span of beautiful adolescence, like, that we look for these markings on the trees to say, oh, somebody else has come this way.
Well, and I think what other thought that just came to mind is sometimes we have experiences that we didn't like or disorienting.
Mm-hmm.
We don't understand them until 20 years later, and we try to
Right.
say, oh, so that's what that was all.
Yes. Right?
You know, for kids, that's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful part of the story, too, is remembering that it might make sense later. Yeah. Just to say, to remind you of all the good things still to come in the wilderness, a reminder that Tina Sullivan will be here next Sunday. I hope that you all be here to hear her. Our own Jim Boyd will be here with us on the 12th. And then Padre Gotuma and Scott in conversation using some poetry to talk about wilderness. So we have great conversations to have to come. This is already so beautiful. Thank you for your sharings. Thanks for being out here in the wilderness together.